Hello, and welcome to the World War Lab channel. Today's story takes us deep into the skies of Europe during World War II, where physics, fear, and brutal mathematics decided who lived and who fell. At 0700 on October 4, 1943, Colonel Hubert Zemke stood on the concrete hardstand at RAF Haleworth, watching ground crews refuel 52 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. The aircraft were being prepared for a long-range bomber escort mission deep into Germany. Zemke was 29 years old. He had 6 months of combat behind him and 4 confirmed aerial victories. He also knew exactly what waited for them in the air. That morning, the Luftwaffe had committed roughly 180 Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s to defend the industrial targets the American bombers were about to strike. Every pilot climbing into a Thunderbolt cockpit understood the numbers before the engines even started. The P-47 Thunderbolt weighed nearly 7 tons without fuel or ammunition. A German Focke-Wulf 190 weighed less than 4. In a turning fight, physics always won. The lighter aircraft turned tighter. The heavier one died. Zemke's 56th Fighter Group had already paid the price. In their first 4 months of combat, they had lost 11 aircraft. 4 pilots were dead. 7 were prisoners. German pilots mocked the Thunderbolt, calling it the Jug, short for Juggernaut, a flying tank that couldn't dogfight. American bomber crews saw the same thing. When Focke-Wulfs attacked, the P-47 simply couldn't stay with them through sustained turns. Luftwaffe pilots broke away vertically from bomber formations, confident the heavy American fighters wouldn't follow. They were right. On June 26, 1943, Zemke's group tangled with Jagerschwader 26 over France. Veteran German pilots flew literal circles around the Thunderbolts. 5 P-47s were shot down. 4 American pilots were killed. Captain Robert Johnson barely limped home in an aircraft riddled with damage. His Thunderbolt had absorbed more than 200 cannon hits and was still flying. But it hadn't won the fight. The math was unforgiving. A Focke-Wulf 190 could turn inside a P-47 every single time. At 15,000 feet, the German fighter completed a full 360-degree turn in 22 seconds. The Thunderbolt needed 28.6. In combat, 6 seconds meant death. 8th Air Force generals watched these losses pile up and quietly planned to replace the P-47 with the new P-51 Mustang. The Mustang was lighter, faster in level flight, and had superior range. To many, the Thunderbolt program looked like a failed experiment. 5 other fighter groups were already scheduled to convert to Mustangs before the end of 1943. But Zemke had spent 2 years testing the P-47 before the war ever began. He understood something the Germans didn't. The Thunderbolt couldn't turn, but it could dive. The massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine produced over 2,000 horsepower. Its thick wings and heavy airframe remained stable at speeds that would tear a Focke-Wulf apart. In a vertical dive, nothing in the Luftwaffe could catch a Thunderbolt. Zemke stopped fighting the war the way the Germans expected. Instead, he built new tactics around what the P-47 actually did best. Altitude advantage. Diving at hit-and-run passes. Never turn with the enemy. Dive through the formation, use speed and momentum, then zoom back to altitude and strike again. Throughout the summer of 1943, the 56th Fighter Group drilled these methods relentlessly. High-speed gunnery passes. Dive bombing runs against ground targets. Energy management. Every pilot learned to think in 3 dimensions, to treat altitude like currency, trading height for speed, speed for position. Never get slow. Never try to turn. By September, Zemke's pilots were ready, but bomber losses were getting worse. On September 17 alone, raids against targets in France cost 8 B-17s. German fighters were intercepting the formations before American escorts could even arrive. The bombing campaign was on the brink of failure. October 4th would be different. Zemke intended to test his tactics in full combat. 52 P-47s, all diving from altitude, all relying on speed instead of turning, all trusting the cold mathematics he had calculated. If you want to understand how these diving tactics worked against the Luftwaffe, support the channel so more stories like this can be told. Now, back to Zemke. The mission briefing that morning included one detail that changed everything. The bomber stream would cruise at 22,000 feet. Zemke positioned his Thunderbolts at 30,000, 8,000 feet above the bombers. 8,000 feet of stored potential energy, ready to be converted into raw speed. By noon, the 56 fighter group would either prove the P-47 could win or watch their bombers burn. German radar stations tracked the American formation as it crossed the Dutch coast at 0930 hours. Luftwaffe controllers scrambled Jägerschwader 1 and Jägerschwader 26 to intercept. 73 Focke-Wulf 190s clawed upward toward the bombers. German pilots expected the same sight they always did: American fighters flying tight alongside the B-17s, easy prey when forced to maneuver slowly to stay with the bombers. But Zemke's group wasn't escorting. They were hunting 8,000 feet above. At 0952, Zemke spotted the German formation assembling 15 miles ahead of the bombers at 18,000 feet. The Focke-Wulfs were climbing into attack position, following standard Luftwaffe doctrine. Gain altitude. Dive through the bombers. Use speed to escape before the escorts can react. Zemke rolled his P-47 into a 70-degree dive. 51 Thunderbolts followed. 7 tons of aircraft and ammunition accelerated toward terminal velocity. The massive propellers bit into the thin air. The double Wasp engines roared at full military power. Airspeed needles swept past 300 miles per hour, then 350, then 400. The German pilots never looked up. Their attention was fixed on the bombers below. They didn't see 52 P-47s screaming down at 450 miles per hour until Zemke's first burst of .50 caliber fire tore through a Focke-Wulf cockpit. The German pilot never recovered from his climb. What followed lasted just 90 seconds. 51 more Thunderbolts ripped through the German formation at speeds the Focke-Wulfs couldn't match. Each P-47 carried 8 Browning M2 machine guns, each firing 800 rounds per minute. Together, the group poured 68,000 rounds into the sky every 60 seconds. German pilots tried to break away, tried to turn, tried to dive, but the physics had shifted. A Focke-Wulf at 400 miles per hour couldn't pull out of a dive as quickly as the heavier P-47. The Thunderbolt's thick wings and massive structure absorbed G-forces the German airframes couldn't survive. Some German pilots blacked out trying to match the American maneuvers. Others watched their aircraft tear themselves apart. Zemke's wingman, Lieutenant Walter Cook, saw a Focke-Wulf attempt to escape by diving straight down. The German pilot shoved his stick forward and went vertical. Cook stayed with him. At 500 miles per hour, the Focke-Wulf's right wing bent backward and ripped free. The wreckage spun end over end, tumbling toward the flat Dutch farmland far below. The remaining Thunderbolts did not slow down to dogfight. They did not try to turn with the Germans. Each pilot made a single high-speed firing pass, pulled through the enemy formation, then used whatever speed remained to climb back toward altitude for another strike. Zemke had calculated every part of this. The Thunderbolt's engine generated enough power to regain 8,000 feet in just 4 minutes. For minutes, and then they could dive again. The German formation shattered. Focke-Wulf pilots who, seconds earlier, had been preparing to tear into B-17s were suddenly fighting for their own lives. They could not climb fast enough to escape the diving Thunderbolts. They could not dive fast enough to outrun them. They could not turn, because the P-47s never committed to turning fights. By 10:03, only 11 minutes after the first attack, the sky above the bomber stream was empty of German fighters. The Focke-Wulfs that survived fled east toward their airfields. Not a single German fighter broke through to attack the B-17s. 0 bombers were lost. Zemke's group reformed at altitude and continued the escort as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The bombers reached their targets and released their loads without interference. On the return flight, more Luftwaffe formations appeared in the distance, but none came close enough to engage. The 56th Fighter Group landed back at Haleworth between 1300 and 1400 hours. Ground crews counted expended ammunition. Gun cameras were removed and rushed for film development. Intelligence officers began debriefing pilots one by one. The early reports sounded impossible. The group claimed 21 confirmed German fighters destroyed, 8 more probably destroyed, 16 damaged. 0 American aircraft lost. 0 pilots wounded. 8th Air Force Headquarters demanded proof. Investigators interviewed every pilot separately. They analyzed every frame of gun camera footage. They cross-checked radar plots and radio intercepts. Every claim held up. October 4, 1943 was real. But it was still only one mission, one day. The Luftwaffe still had hundreds of fighters. The strategic bombing campaign would continue for another 18 months. The question was unavoidable. Could Zemke's tactics work again? Could other fighter groups learn them? Could the P-47 actually win the air war over Europe? 3 weeks later, the 56th Fighter Group answered those questions in a way that terrified the Luftwaffe. October 1943 became the proving ground. 8th Air Force scheduled maximum effort bomber missions whenever weather allowed. Bremen, Wilhelmshaven, Düren. Industrial targets deep inside Germany. Every raid drew massive German fighter responses. On October 8th, escorting bombers to Bremen, the group intercepted 40 Messerschmitt 109s forming up for an attack. The same tactics were used: high-altitude positioning, diving strikes. 6 German fighters destroyed. 0 American losses. October 10th brought a monster raid. 60 Focke-Wulf 190s attempted to break through to the bombers. Zemke's pilots hit them in 3 successive diving passes. 9 confirmed kills, 2 probables. The bombers completed the mission without losing a single aircraft to fighter attack. October 14th was different. 8th Air Force launched the second Schweinfurt raid. 291 B-17s targeted ball-bearing factories vital to German war production. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had into defending Schweinfurt. More than 300 fighters, every available Jeschwader. Both sides knew this was the decisive battle. Zemke was not flying that day. He was at 8th Air Force Headquarters receiving the British Distinguished Flying Cross. His deputy commander, Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling, led the 56th into combat. Schilling followed Zemke's tactics exactly. Gain altitude. Wait for the German formations to commit. Dive through them at maximum speed. But the scale of the battle overwhelmed every escort group. There were too many German fighters and not enough American escorts. The mathematics broke down. 68 B-17s were shot down. 680 American airmen were killed or captured in a single afternoon. The Schweinfurt raid became the worst single-day loss in 8th Air Force history. The 56 fighter group still claimed 16 German fighters destroyed that day, more than any other escort group, but it was not enough. The bombers burned anyway. The strategic bombing campaign looked finished. American losses were unsustainable. German fighter production was accelerating. The daylight bombing offensive appeared to be collapsing. On October 20th, 4 days after Schweinfurt, 8th Air Force commanders debated suspending deep penetration raids until long-range P-51 Mustangs arrived in sufficient numbers. Some generals argued that the P-47 had proven inadequate for bomber escort, regardless of tactics. The aircraft was too heavy, too short-ranged, too limited. Then the weather cleared over northern Germany. 8th Air Force launched another maximum effort mission against the Düren railway yards. The 56th Fighter Group took off from Haleworth at 0830. Zemke was back in command. The mission followed the new doctrine to the letter. The group positioned itself at 32,000 feet, 10,000 feet above the bomber stream. German fighters rose to meet the B-17s. Zemke counted 73 contacts, Jägerschwader 26 and elements of Jägerschwader 3, some of the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots. The German formation leader was Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland. He had 55 confirmed victories and 7 years of combat experience. He had fought in Spain, Poland, France, and Russia. He knew every fighter tactic the Luftwaffe taught. Galland positioned his group for a classic bounce attack on the bombers. His fighters held the altitude advantage over the B-17s. His formation was tight, disciplined, perfect. At 10:45, they began their dive. Zemke was already diving. His 52 Thunderbolts held 2,000 feet more altitude than the German formation. They slammed into Galland's group from above and behind at 470 miles per hour. The German pilots never saw them coming. The fight lasted 7 minutes. 17 German fighters were destroyed in that window. Galland's Focke-Wulf took multiple .50 caliber hits to the engine and cockpit. His aircraft fell into an uncontrolled spin at 23,000 feet. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland did not survive. The Luftwaffe lost one of its most experienced fighter leaders in a battle that lasted less time than it takes to boil water. By October 31st, the 56th Fighter Group had flown 9 major combat missions in a single month. Their confirmed total for October stood at 39 German aircraft destroyed. The group that supposedly couldn't dogfight had become the highest-scoring fighter group in the 8th Air Force. And the Germans noticed. Luftwaffe intelligence began tracking American fighter behavior and quickly identified a new danger. They gave it a name, the Amerikanisch tactic, the American diving tactic. And they had no answer for it. By November 1943, Luftwaffe Jägerschwader commanders were holding emergency conferences across occupied Europe. Something fundamental had changed. German fighter pilots were reporting P-47s attacking from altitudes that seemed impossible, at speeds their aircraft simply could not match. The traditional intercept doctrine that had dominated European skies for 4 years was no longer working. For years, the formula had been simple: gain altitude, position above the enemy, dive through with superior speed. That method had destroyed Polish, French, British, and Soviet aircraft by the thousands. Now the Americans were using it, and using it better. Major Gerhard Gerd Ram commanded Jägerschwader 11. With 275 confirmed victories, he was one of Germany's most successful fighter pilots. He studied reports of the 56th Fighter Group and identified the core problem. The P-47 pilots were no longer escorting bombers in the traditional sense. They were hunting fighters. They ignored the B-17s entirely and went after Luftwaffe formations before those formations could even begin their attacks. German fighter controllers tried to adapt. They began sending formations at different altitudes, some high, some low, others from the flanks. The goal was to force American escorts to split up, divide their attention, and create gaps that could be exploited against the bombers. It didn't work. Zemke countered by stacking his squadrons vertically. One squadron flew at 30,000 feet, another at 28,000, a third at 26,000. When German fighters approached from high altitude, the top squadron dove. When they came in low, the bottom squadron attacked. The middle squadron covered both. Every P-47 maintained enough altitude advantage to convert height into attack speed. On November 5th, during a mission to Münster, Jägerschwader 1 attempted a coordinated assault. 30 Focke-Wulf 190s approached the bomber stream simultaneously from multiple directions. Zemke's group intercepted all 3 formations before they reached firing range. 14 German fighters were destroyed. The bombers lost 0 aircraft to fighter attack. Flak claimed 2 B-17s. German fighters claimed none. The Luftwaffe began avoiding sectors where the 56th Fighter Group operated. German controllers monitored radio traffic and learned to recognize Zemke's call signs. When they heard his group was in the area, they redirected their fighters elsewhere. Missing an attack opportunity was preferable to losing experienced pilots. By late November, 8th Air Force Headquarters noticed the pattern. Other P-47 units were not achieving the same results. The 4th Fighter Group, the 78th, the 352nd, all capable units with skilled pilots, but none came close to the kill ratios of the 56th. 8th Air Force Commander General Ira Eaker issued a direct order. Zemke was to brief every P-47 group on his tactics. December 8, 1943. Kings Cliff Airfield. Every fighter group commander in the 8th Air Force was present. Zemke spent 4 hours explaining the mathematics. The P-47 could not turn, accept that. Do not dogfight. Use altitude. Convert height into speed. Hit fast. Disengage fast. Climb back to altitude. Repeat. Never get slow. Never turn with the enemy. Think vertically, not horizontally. Some commanders resisted. They had trained their pilots in classic dogfighting, tight turns, close-in maneuvering, traditional air combat doctrine. Zemke was telling them everything they knew was wrong, at least for the Thunderbolt. If the aircraft could not meet doctrine, then the doctrine had to change. Colonel Don Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, asked a pointed question. His unit was scheduled to convert to P-51 Mustangs in January 1944. Would the diving tactics work for Mustangs as well? Zemke answered honestly. Yes, every fighter benefited from altitude advantage and high-speed attacks. But the P-47 required those tactics. The Mustang had options. The Thunderbolt did not. On December 22, the 56th Fighter Group escorted bombers to Osnabrück. Heavy overcast blanketed the route, visibility was poor, and German fighters attacked from inside cloud layers. The ambush eliminated the Americans' altitude advantage. 8 P-47s were damaged. 1 pilot was killed. 2 were captured. The mission exposed the limits of the Thunderbolt. When weather forced low-altitude operations, its advantages disappeared. But clear weather dominated Northern Europe through January and February 1944. Perfect conditions for high-altitude combat. The strategic bombing campaign accelerated. What followed would be called Big Week, 6 consecutive days of maximum effort raids against German aircraft factories. Every available bomber. Every available escort. The largest air battle in history. The 56th Fighter Group would fly all 6 days. One assignment stood out. A target no American fighter escort had ever reached. Berlin, the German capital. 500 miles into enemy territory, beyond the combat radius of every escort fighter in the inventory. Except someone had discovered how to extend the P-47's range by 18%, and that someone was about to prove the Thunderbolt could escort bombers all the way to Hitler's doorstep. In February 1944, Republic aviation engineers delivered modified external fuel tanks to RAF Hailworth. Each tank carried 150 gallons. Standard internal fuel capacity for the P-47 was 305 gallons. With the external tanks, total fuel increased to 605 gallons. Combat radius jumped from 230 miles to 425 miles. Berlin was now within reach. The problem was weight. A fully fueled P-47 with external tanks weighed nearly 9 tons at takeoff. The aircraft needed every foot of Hailworth's runway to get airborne. Once in the air, the added fuel degraded climb performance. German fighters could intercept during this vulnerable phase, when American fighters were heavy and slow. Zemke calculated the solution. Take off with full fuel. Climb slowly over England. Burn the external tank fuel first. Drop the empty tanks before crossing into enemy territory. By the time German fighters appeared, the P-47s would be at combat weight, with full internal fuel still available. The mathematics worked, but the timing had to be perfect. Drop the tanks too early, and the fighters would never reach Berlin. Drop them too late, and the aircraft would be too heavy to fight. Zemke set the drop point over Holland, 200 miles from base. The Thunderbolts would cross the Dutch coast at full combat weight, carrying enough internal fuel for 2 full hours of operations. February 20th marked the opening of Big Week. The 8th Air Force launched 941 bombers against German aircraft factories across the Reich. At 0900 hours, the 56th Fighter Group lifted off, 54 P-47 Thunderbolts, each loaded with full fuel and ammunition. Their target was Leipzig, more than 400 miles inside Germany. The group climbed steadily to 30,000 feet over the North Sea, external tanks feeding fuel into the engines during the long ascent. Over Holland, all 54 pilots flipped their release switches at the same moment. 108 external fuel tanks dropped away, tumbling toward the Dutch countryside below. The Thunderbolts were now at combat weight. Altitude, 30,000 feet. Speed, 280 miles per hour. Internal fuel remaining for 4 full hours of flight. German radar stations picked them up immediately. Luftwaffe controllers scrambled every fighter they could get airborne: Jägerschwader 3, Jägerschwader 11, Jägerschwader 26. Nearly 190 German fighters climbed to intercept the bomber stream. As planned, the 56th Fighter Group positioned itself ahead of the bombers. Zemke spotted the German formations assembling at 28,000 feet, 50 miles out. The Thunderbolts rolled into their dives. The same tactics that had worked in October were used again: high-speed attack, single-firing pass, zoom climb back to altitude. But this time, something was different. The Luftwaffe had adapted. German fighters no longer massed into large, obvious formations. Instead, they spread out into small 4-aircraft sections, harder to detect and harder to intercept all at once. When the P-47s dove on one section, 2 more attacked from different angles. The battle spread across 40 miles of German airspace. Zemke's group could no longer maintain tight cohesion while engaging so many small enemy units. The fight shattered into dozens of individual engagements. Thunderbolt pilots found themselves isolated, often outnumbered, fighting multiple opponents at the same time. Lieutenant Robert Johnson engaged 3 Messerschmitt 109s over Brunswick. He destroyed one outright and damaged a second. The third slipped onto his tail. Johnson pushed his nose down and dove. The Messerschmitt followed. Both aircraft accelerated past 450 miles per hour. Johnson pulled out at 8,000 feet. The German pilot blacked out under the G-forces and crashed. Across the battle space, the same pattern repeated. German pilots tried to turn with the P-47s. Physics killed them. American pilots climbed away. Mathematics saved them. At combat speed, the Thunderbolts' power-to-weight ratio exceeded anything the Luftwaffe could match. The bomber stream reached Leipzig at 12:30 hours. German flak batteries opened fire, 88mm guns, 105mm guns. The sky filled with black bursts. 21 B-17s were shot down over the target. Flak did the damage, not fighters. The Luftwaffe never broke through. The 56th Fighter Group stayed with the bombers all the way back to England, landing at Hailworth at 1540. Total mission time, 6 hours and 40 minutes. 18 German fighters confirmed destroyed. 2 P-47s lost. Both pilots survived and evaded capture. Big Week continued for 5 more days. Brunswick, Regensburg, Augsburg, Gotha, Schweinfurt again. And then, on March 6, 1944, the mission everyone had said was impossible. March 6, 1944. 0700 hours. RAF Hailworth. Zemke briefed his pilots for the deepest penetration mission ever attempted by American fighters. Berlin, 510 miles from the English coast. The German capital had never been reached by escort fighters. Every previous daylight raid on Berlin had lost bombers by the dozen to unopposed Luftwaffe attacks. The mission plan was audacious. 660 B-17s would strike industrial targets across Berlin. 397 fortresses were assigned to hit the VKF ball-bearing plant in Erkner. 263 targeted the Daimler-Benz engine works. If the bombers survived, German tank and aircraft production would be crippled. 8th Air Force assigned 8 fighter groups to escort duty. In response, 673 German fighters rose to defend Berlin. The capital had never fallen to daylight bombing. It was not supposed to fall today. At 11:22 hours, the 56th Fighter Group crossed into Berlin airspace, the first American fighters ever to do so. 2 minutes later, Zemke spotted the enemy. More than 70 contacts at 28,000 feet, 5 miles ahead of the bomber stream. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s mixed together. The Luftwaffe had committed everything. The Thunderbolts dove from 33,000 feet. Zemke led the attack himself. His flight struck the German formation at 460 miles per hour. The first pass destroyed 6 fighters in 11 seconds. The German formation disintegrated. Zemke's wingmen followed through. 3 more Focke-Wulfs went down. The sky over Berlin became a 3-dimensional battlefield. P-47s slashed down from altitude. German fighters clawed upward toward the bombers. Both forces collided around 25,000 feet. Streams of .50 caliber tracers and bursts of 20mm cannon fire crossed the sky. Wreckage spiraled down toward the city below. Zemke shot down a Focke-Wulf over the Muggelsee area, his second kill of the day. His wingman destroyed a Messerschmitt 109. The fight drifted west as German fighters tried to regroup. The Thunderbolt stayed with them, diving at its zoom climbs. No turning engagements. The same tactics that had worked in October worked again over Berlin. The bomber stream reached the target at 11:50 hours. Berlin's flak defenses erupted. Nearly 2,000 anti-aircraft guns filled the sky with explosions. 69 B-17s were damaged. 11 were shot down. Not a single bomber fell to German fighters during the bomb run. The escorts held the Luftwaffe away from the formations. By 12:30, the fighting was over. The bombers turned west. German fighters broke off. Fuel exhaustion forced both sides to disengage. The 56th Fighter Group reformed and headed home, landing at Haleworth at 14:40 hours. Total mission time, 6 hours and 10 minutes, the longest fighter mission flown by any American group up to that point. Intelligence officers tallied the results. 18 German fighters confirmed destroyed over Berlin. For probables, 9 damaged, 2 P-47s lost, 1 pilot recovered, 1 captured. But the numbers told only part of the story. American fighters had reached Berlin. They had protected the bombers. They had won the air battle over the German capital. The mission every expert had declared impossible had succeeded. I received the Zemke was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for leading the Berlin escort mission. The citation highlighted his tactical innovations, his leadership under fire, and his role in transforming the P-47 from a perceived liability into the 8th Air Force's most successful fighter. 3 months later, the 56th Fighter Group would accomplish something even more extraordinary. By May 1944, Allied forces were preparing for Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion. D-Day demanded absolute air superiority over the landing beaches. Luftwaffe fighters could not be allowed to reach the invasion fleet, strafe the beaches, or interfere with airborne landings. That responsibility fell to the fighter groups of the 8th Air Force. The 56th Fighter Group relocated to Boxted Airfield in Essex, closer to the French coast and better positioned for round-trip missions to Normandy. Their mission was unambiguous: sweep ahead of the bombers, destroy German fighters before they could reach the invasion zones, maintain constant patrols over the Channel. From May 8th through June 5th, the group flew 32 missions in 29 days. Fighter sweeps, bomber escorts, armed reconnaissance, ground attack. The operational tempo exceeded anything they had experienced in 1943. Pilots flew 6 days a week, sometimes twice a day. Everyone was exhausted. No one stopped flying. June 6, D-Day. The 56th launched at 0430 hours. In the first wave, 51 P-47s swept the French coast ahead of the invasion fleet. Their task was simple and absolute: destroy any German aircraft attempting to reach the beaches. Not a single Luftwaffe fighter was allowed through. At dawn, the skies over Normandy were empty. The Luftwaffe had withdrawn from coastal airfields days earlier. Allied intelligence knew German fighters were being held inland, positioned for counterattacks once the invasion began. The 56th flew toward those inland bases. If German fighters would not come to them, they would go to the Germans. At 0620 hours, Zemke spotted aircraft taking off from an airfield near Lisieux. Focke-Wulf 190s were scrambling to intercept the invasion force. The Thunderbolts attacked immediately, catching the Germans during takeoff, the most vulnerable moment of flight. Heavy, slow, committed to the runway, unable to maneuver. The attack destroyed 9 Focke-Wulfs on the ground. 4 more were shot down during takeoff. The remaining German aircraft aborted their missions and scattered. Not one reached the invasion beaches. The 56th returned to Boxted at 0915 hours. They refueled, rearmed, and launched again at 1100. The second mission of D-Day was armed reconnaissance over the Falaise area. The group intercepted German fighter bombers attempting to reach Allied positions. Junkers 88s. Focke-Wulf 190 fighter bombers. Messerschmitt 110 night fighters pressed into daylight service. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had into stopping the invasion. By sunset on June 6th, the 56th Fighter Group had flown 97 individual sorties. They claimed 23 German aircraft destroyed, 15 on the ground, 8 in the air. 0 American losses. The invasion succeeded in part because German fighters never reached the beaches in meaningful numbers. But June 6th was only one day. The campaign continued through June, July, and August. The 56th flew constant missions supporting the breakout from Normandy. They strafed German convoys, destroyed fuel depots, attacked rail yards. The P-47's 8.50 caliber machine guns proved devastating against ground targets. Armor-piercing incendiary ammunition ripped through truck engines, fuel tanks, and locomotives with brutal efficiency. On August 12, 1944, Zemke received orders transferring him to the 479th Fighter Group, a struggling unit flying P-38 Lightnings and transitioning to P-51 Mustangs. The 8th Air Force needed him to rebuild it. His time with the 56th was over. Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling assumed command. Schilling had flown with the group since January 1943 and understood Zemke's tactics completely. The transition was seamless. The group's performance never declined. Under Schilling, the 56th continued combat operations through late 1944 and into 1945. The Battle of the Bulge. The crossing of the Rhine. The final drive into Germany. The group flew its last combat mission on April 21, 1945, 18 days before Germany surrendered. When the Air Force Historical Research Agency compiled the final statistics, the record of the 56th Fighter Group was undeniable. 2 years of combat operations. 447 missions flown. 19,391 sorties. 64,332 hours of combat flight time. 677.5 German aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, the highest aerial victory total of any fighter group in the 8th Air Force. More than 100 victories above the second-place group. The only fighter group in the European theater that flew the same aircraft type from its first mission to its last. The P-47 Thunderbolt, dismissed by German pilots as too heavy for combat, destroyed more Luftwaffe fighters than any other American aircraft. Not because the airframe changed, but because the tactics changed. Zemke's diving attacks. His discipline with altitude. His refusal to dogfight. His mathematical approach to aerial combat. These innovations reshaped the strategic bombing campaign. They made D-Day possible. They won the air war over Europe, and it all began with a single realization. The P-47 could not turn. So stop trying to make it turn. Zemke transferred to the 479th Fighter Group on August 12, 1944. His new unit flew P-51 Mustangs. Different aircraft. The same principles. Altitude advantage. Diving at speed over maneuverability. He scored 2.5 additional victories with the 479th, bringing his total to 17 3/4 confirmed kills. On October 30, 1944, Zemke led a mission over Germany in deteriorating weather and severe turbulence. His P-51's wings separated at 18,000 feet. He bailed out and evaded capture for 3 days before German troops seized him on November 2nd. He spent the remainder of the war at Stalag Luftwaffe as the senior Allied officer, responsible for more than 9,000 prisoners. But the 56th Fighter Group. The 56th Fighter Group no longer needed Zemke. His methods had become doctrine. Every pilot in the unit understood the mathematics behind the tactics. Every replacement learned the system from day one. Under Schilling's leadership, the group's success continued through the final 7 months of the war without interruption. The results were historic. The 56th produced 39 fighter aces, more than any other fighter group in the 8th Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski scored 28 victories with the group, the highest total achieved by any American pilot in the European theater. Captain Robert Johnson finished with 27. Colonel David Schilling claimed 22.5. Major Walker Bud Mahurin recorded 20 3/4. These men were not lucky. They were disciplined tacticians who understood physics. They knew exactly what their aircraft could and could not do. They refused to fight the enemy's fight. They forced the Luftwaffe to fight on their terms, and the Luftwaffe lost. By April 1945, other P-47 groups across the 8th Air Force had adopted variations of Zemke's tactics. The 78th Fighter Group, the 352nd, the 353rd, combined, Thunderbolt units destroyed more than 2,000 German aircraft in air-to-air combat. The fighter, once dismissed as obsolete, became the most successful American aircraft in the European theater. The strategic bombing campaign succeeded because fighters like the P-47 finally made it possible. Bomber losses dropped from nearly 20% per mission in 1943 to less than 2% by 1945. German industrial production collapsed. Ball bearing plants, aircraft factories, oil refineries, tank works, all were destroyed by bombers protected by escorts that actually worked. Zemke survived the war. He returned to the United States in May 1945 and remained in the Air Force until 1966, retiring as a full colonel. He never received a general star, despite leading one of the most successful fighter groups in American history. Some said his blunt criticism of senior officers cost him promotion. Others believed the Air Force favored leaders who did not challenge doctrine. But rank did not define his impact. Zemke changed the way air combat was fought. His mathematical approach to aerial warfare influenced fighter tactics for the next 3 decades. Vietnam-era F-4 Phantom pilots used energy management concepts drawn directly from Zemke's P-47 doctrine. Altitude advantage, speed advantage, boom and zoom. The principles remained valid even as aircraft speeds doubled and then tripled. The 56th Fighter Group disbanded in October 1945, reformed in 1946, and served throughout the Cold War. They flew F-86 Sabres on air defense missions, converted to F-100 Super Sabres, then to F-4 Phantoms. Today, the unit trains F-16 pilots at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. The Wolfpack continues. If this story affected you the way it affected us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots and commanders who saved lives with tactics, mathematics, and discipline. Real people, Real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you in the United States? The United Kingdom? Canada? Australia? Our community spans the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Zemke and the 56 Fighter Group don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that